On the surface, Norris Lake is a serene Appalachian escape. Beneath its waters lay Loyston, a small town in Union County where families once grew corn, gathered at church, and survived the river floods. When the Tennessee Valley Authority drew the basin for its very first New Deal dam in 1933, those ordinary lives, and even their graveyards, were condemned to vanish. What was gained and what was lost when progress meant drowning a community? Morning in the Clinch River Valley began with the sound of roosters and the smell of wood smoke curling from kitchen chimneys. Families in Loyston and the outlying hollows woke to the steady rhythm of land and season. Cornfields stretched across the bottomlands, stalks thick and green by midsummer, while beans climbed up poles in tidy rows. Orchards of apple and peach trees marked the edges of farmsteads, each tree a family story grafted or grown from seed and handed down through generations. Most households kept a flock of chickens scratching in the yard, a few milk cows in the barn, and hogs fattening on acorns and kitchen scraps. The fall brought hog-killing days, when neighbors gathered at first light to help with the butchering. Lard was rendered, hams and shoulders cured in smokehouses, and nothing went to waste. Root cellars dug deep into the hillside held potatoes, apples, jars of beans, tomatoes, and chow-chow pickles. Women spent long days in late summer canning the harvest, their hands stained with juice and brine, the kitchen air heavy with vinegar and steam. Sundays meant church, sometimes a white-painted clapboard building, sometimes a brush arbor by the riverbank. After the service, families spread quilts on the grass for dinner on the grounds, fried chicken, biscuits, pies made from last year, as dried apples. Children chased one another among the gravestones, while elders swapped news and recipes. Life here followed a calendar of necessity and tradition: spring plowing, corn planting, hay cutting, bean picking, cider pressing, each job shared among kin and neighbors. Barn raisings brought together whole communities, with teams of men lifting beams and women feeding the crowd from cast iron pots. Isolation shaped daily life, but so did a sense of belonging. The river could rise without warning, flooding fields and washing away fence lines, but it also brought rich silt and fish for the table. Roads were rough, stores few and far between, so most needs were met at home or traded among families. Children learned to read by lamplight, to churn butter, to mend harness, to tell the weather by the look of the sky. Every household had its routines, but all were connected by the land beneath their feet and the steady turn of the seasons. In this valley, progress was measured in the fullness of the root cellar, the health of the livestock, and the stories told around the supper table. The world beyond the hills felt distant, its changes slow to arrive. Here, daily life was built from the soil up, each gesture, planting, canning, gathering, rooted in memory and hope for another year. Even in the most familiar seasons, the land around Loyston could turn against its people. Flooding was a constant threat, sometimes gentle, sometimes ruinous. After heavy rains, the Clinch River would spill its banks, swallowing fields and washing away the work of months in a single night. Families built fences over and over, knowing high water might sweep them away again before the year was out. Corn and hay, once green and promising, could rot in standing water or vanish beneath a sheet of muddy current. The same river that fed gardens and livestock could, with little warning, erase a season's hope. Soil loss was another slow thief. Hillsides, once thick with chestnut and oak, had been cleared for new fields or for timber. Each spring, rain cut small gullies into the plowed ground, carrying away the thin topsoil that crops depended on. Over years, some patches grew stony and poor, and families moved their gardens higher, or tried to coax a little more corn from tired earth. The valley's bounty was never guaranteed. It had to be fought for, year after year. Yet these hardships did not drive people away. Instead, they deepened the ties to place. Loyston's families rebuilt after every flood, shored up their barns, and swapped stories about the biggest rises anyone could remember. The loss of a crop meant neighbors shared what they had. children learned to read the river's moods and the color of the sky, as much a part of their education as the lessons in the schoolhouse. By the 1930s, the outside world began to take notice. The Tennessee Valley Authority sent surveyors and sociologists into the basin, clipboards in hand, to record acres, outbuildings, and family names. Photographer Lewis Hine arrived with his camera, capturing the faces of men and women at their doors, children in Sunday clothes, the weathered siding of farmhouses, and the rutted roads that tied the valley together. These images, now filed in archives, show not just poverty or struggle, but daily life. A girl with her dog on a porch, a mother shelling beans, a church crowd gathered after service. Tennessee Valley Authority records filled with columns and numbers, land holdings, crop yields, income, household size. But the photographs and field notes hint at something harder to measure. The stubborn pride in a place, the rituals of making do, the belief that hardship could be endured if you belonged to the land. For Loyston and its neighbors, the river's threats were familiar, and the cost of living here was woven into every story told around the table. These records, both written and photographic, would soon become the final testimony for a valley on the verge of being redrawn by distant hands. In May 1933, Congress created the Tennessee Valley Authority, or TVA. The country was in the depths of the Great Depression. Banks were failing, crops were withering in drought, and rural areas like East Tennessee had little electricity and few prospects for change. President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed the TVA Act with the promise of turning the Tennessee Valley from a region of chronic hardship into a national example of recovery and progress. The TVA was charged with more than just building a dam or stringing a few power lines. Its mission included flood control, cheap hydroelectric power, modern farming, and new jobs for thousands left idle by the economic crash. Agency leaders, engineer Arthur Morgan, utility reformer David Lilienthal, and agriculturalist Harcourt Morgan, saw the Tennessee River and its tributaries as the backbone of a plan to uplift the entire region. They spoke of harnessing rivers that had flooded and isolated communities for generations, using them instead to power factories, light homes, and irrigate fields. The first test of this vision was Norris Dam, chosen for a stretch of the Clinch River between Anderson and Campbell counties. This was not just an engineering project. TVAA promoted Norris as a demonstration, an experiment in coordinated planning, rural electrification, and a new deal for the Tennessee Valley. The agency maps outlined a vast area, the Norris Basin. It included not only the land that would soon lie underwater, but also farms, forests, and crossroads towns like Loyston, drawn into the project in the name of progress. For families in the basin, the future was suddenly in the hands of distant planners. TVA's arrival meant that lines on a government map would soon decide who stayed and who would be asked to leave. The story of Norris Dam began with national crisis and federal ambition, but its consequences would be measured in the fate of every field, every home, and every community inside those newly drawn lines. Federal authority arrived in the Clinch River Valley as a sweep of pencil and ink. Under the TVA Act of 1933, the new power company claimed the right to buy, lease, or condemn any land it considered necessary for dams, reservoirs, and transmission lines. Surveyors fanned out across Anderson, Campbell, Union, Granger, and Claiborne counties, marking the land not just for what it was, a patchwork of fields, orchards, and homes, but for what it would become, project acreage. The Norris Basin was defined on government maps as roughly 150,000 acres, a territory stitched together by contour lines drawn at the intended high water mark. Anything below that line, and often a strip above it for shoreline and access, was slated for federal acquisition. TVA engineers set the reservoir full pool elevation, then traced its reach onto plat maps, each parcel numbered and matched to an owner's name. These maps did more than record boundaries. They converted lived-in places into legal descriptions for court petitions. If a landowner hesitated or refused the TVA offer, the agency filed condemnation actions in federal court, citing its statutory power to take property for public use. The court would appoint commissioners or a jury to decide on compensation, but the outcome was never in doubt. Once judged necessary, the land became project land, no matter the story behind its fences. In Union County, the line cut straight through Loyston. Families who had measured their lives in rows of corn or the shade of old trees now found themselves inside a basin defined by federal necessity. The new boundary was not a fence or a riverbank, but a contour on a surveyor's page, enforced by deeds, court orders, and the slow machinery of clearance. Every tract below the marked elevation, every barn, every churchyard, was now subject to the same process: appraised, listed, and, if needed, condemned. The Norris Basin existed first as a set of lines on paper, but those lines carried the weight of law, turning kitchen tables and family cemeteries into acquisition targets for a project that would soon erase them from the map. TVA engineers arrived in the Clinch River Valley with measuring rods and notebooks, walking fence rows and creek beds to record every rise and hollow. Their survey crews mapped the future reservoir, marking the land with stakes and colored flags. Each farmstead, orchard, and patch of woods was measured and plotted against a new set of priorities. The result was a series of depth charts, grids of numbers and lines that turned fields and crossroads into elevations and watermarks. These charts told, in feet and decimals, how deep the water would be above a kitchen floor or a church doorstep once the gates closed. While surveyors worked in the fields, another team set up cameras and tripods. TVA's Public Relations Office produced a steady stream of promotional films and photo essays. These reels showed tractors plowing new demonstration farms, smiling families flipping light switches in modern kitchens, and children splashing in the shallows of a future lake. Scenes of the Norris Dam rising out of the riverbed played alongside optimistic narrators promising a brighter tomorrow for the Tennessee Valley. In these films, loss was rarely mentioned. The valley's transformation was cast as a triumph of engineering and national will. Its costs measured only in acres and statistics. The official record grew thicker with maps, charts, and reels, each reinforcing the image of progress. The human geography of the basin, its kitchens, graveyards, and front porches, was converted into data points and promotional footage. TVA's archive filled with evidence, depth charts that erased addresses, and films that made the coming flood look like a celebration. For every family facing the end of a way of life, there was a press release or a newsreel ready to explain it away. The story of the Norris Basin, from this vantage, became a series of numbers and before and after images, carefully managed for the public eye. Beneath the surface of these records, the valley's true cost waited to be counted. Nearly 3,000 families, 2,890 in all, were forced to leave the Norris Basin over just a few years. Each name on the TVA's relocation ledgers represented a household uprooted from fields, orchards, and the only home many had ever known. The scale of removal was matched only by the scale of what had to be left behind. Over 5,000 graves were exhumed from churchyards and family plots across the valley. Coffins were lifted from red clay and slate, sometimes with kin standing by, sometimes with no one left to claim the bones. The dead, like the living, were sorted, recorded, and relocated. Some were reburied together in new hilltop cemeteries, like New Loyston Memorial. Others were scattered to different counties. What had been a patchwork of family burial grounds and church cemeteries became a ledger entry and a line on a map. The valley's history, measured in generations, was packed into moving vans and pine boxes cleared to make way for rising water. When the water came, it didn't just erase houses and barns, it washed away a way of living, built around the kitchen table and the fields just outside the door. The best farmland lay along the river, dark, silty soil that yielded heavy crops of corn, beans, and hay. When those bottomlands disappeared beneath the rising lake, Families lost not only their main harvest, but the ground that had anchored their food and their memories. Canning sheds stood empty, their shelves no longer lined with jars of beans and peaches put up for winter. Smokehouses that once held hams, bacon, and sausage, cured with hickory and salt, were torn down or left to rot. The rituals that shaped each season, hog killings, canning days, church suppers drawn from gardens and pantries, could not survive the scattering of people and the loss of fertile ground. The knowledge passed down in these kitchens, the stories told over boiling kettles and worn cutting boards, faded as families left the land that had made such abundance possible. Maddie Randolph's family held on as long as they could. Even after most neighbors had packed up, she stayed in her cabin, refusing to leave the only home she had ever known. Federal officers arrived with orders in hand. The Randolphs were forced out, and the cabin, logs blackened with age and outbuildings leaning into the hillside, was set alight by TVA crews. Ash and smoke drifted over the empty fields, erasing the last trace of a life built by hand. In March of 1936, the gates at Norris Dam closed. Water crept up through the valley, swallowing fence posts and orchard rows, then rising past the spot where Maddie's kitchen once stood. Old roads vanished under the new shoreline. The river that had shaped every season now covered it all, leaving only the memory of stubborn refusal and the silence that follows when a place is finally gone. Today, over 2,800 families, farms, and kitchens remain underwater, erased but not forgotten. As new projects redraw maps and reshape rural America, the story beneath each reservoir warns us that progress often demands silence from the people it displaces. Every smooth lake surface reflects both innovation and absence. The real cost of a brighter future is the memory we choose to keep or let sink. Share your thoughts below.